Hello and welcome to Fine is a Four-Letter Word. My guest today is Stefanie Joy Muscat. Welcome to the show.
Exactly.
Yes, or whatever time it is, wherever you are. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. And one of the things that I do want to remember to get into, although not right at this second, is the logo for your company, because I love that story.
Absolutely.
And it's so cool. And I just want all of my listeners to hear it too. So, but we'll get there. We'll get there. Yes, about ravens. Yes. Yeah, very cool. All right. So, but first, let's start with at the beginning, which is, what were the values and beliefs that you were raised with that contributed to you becoming who you became, especially as a young adult?
The value of giving back to the community. My father was in the government and nonprofit sectors, and I think he was probably the greatest influence on the young adult that I became. I watched him lead these organizations and make changes and have a positive impact where we were living. And he also took me to lots of museums, lots of battlefields, lots of castles, lots of fortifications. If it had something to do with history, he took me there. He actually had written a book about Michelangelo's fortifications that was published, I think, when he was in his 20s. So that love of history and culture and that dedication to giving back really were core values that I think led to the young adult that I became, and eventually me landing in the nonprofit world that I landed in.
Yeah. So were you volunteering for organizations?
The very first museum I ever volunteered
as a
for
kid?
Was the Denos Museum Center, which is still in Traverse City, Michigan. And I was maybe 14, 15, and I was volunteering at the front desk. All the other volunteers were like over 75. So I really stood out on the front desk. And at that time I had an algebra teacher who was collecting Inuit art for the museum. And it was the only algebra teacher that I actually did any well with, because we spent most of our time talking about Inuit art and then a little bit about algebra. So I actually got a good grade in that class, which is unusual for me in algebra. But that really continued and sparked my love of museums. It also sparked a love of Inuit art. I now have my own collection of Inuit art, and every time I'm in Quebec or Iceland or Greenland or further north than Maine, I typically will pick up a piece. So that was another milestone, that experience. And I was there from all 4 years of high school. And then when I went off to college at Michigan State, I volunteered at the Michigan State University Museum, which then later became my first job. So from a very young age, I've always been volunteering. I actually created my first museum when I was 5, I think it was 5 or 6. We were living in Connecticut, and we had visited a museum, and I had seen that they were putting numbers on objects, and I didn't know what a curator was. I didn't know what accession numbers were. I just saw that they were numbers. So I took a magic marker and wrote numbers in my 5-year-old hand on the bottom of some of my mother's most expensive and precious Scottish antiques, and then charged my friends to come to my museum. So I devalued some of the family, family antiques, but it was my very first museum, and I think I made maybe $3, and I took it to 7-Eleven and put it in their little donation container. And so even at 5, I somehow knew that a museum had value and shouldn't be free. So if I had put this together, folks were going to pay an admission to go. So it has just been ingrained in me forever. It's part of my pulse. It's part of my soul.
All right, so I have to ask now, did your mom get mad at you for doing that?
But just think that it was cute. And my father, being such the history buff that he was, he just loved it. And I think he probably gave me the most quarters for the most tours. So Yep, that's how it all began.
That is hilarious. Oh my gosh. That's such a great story. That's how it all began. And then how did it proceed? So did you start out working? So you said your first job was at a museum. And then were all of your jobs at a museum, or
so
did you end up in corporate at some point?
Museums or similar places. I was at the MSU Museum. I was at the Ipswich Museums. I was at the New England Aquarium. All of my work had been in the museum field, and then I opened up my own business in 2004. I had been a museum director. I had a little baby girl who's now 23, and I wanted to be a mom, but wanted to work as well. And the demands of my board being a director were just not in congruence with being a mom. And so I took the leap at like 30 years old to start my own business. And I didn't have a business plan. I did all the things that you were not supposed to do. I had no business plan. I had really no idea where my first client was going to come from. I didn't even know what the services were going to be. I just jumped in and went to a New England Museum Association conference and started talking to people. You know, what do you need? I can do that. So that's how it all started.
You know, well, so I want to touch on that for a second, because you didn't have anything that you're supposed to have.
That is very true.
And but who makes up these rules that this is what you're supposed to do? Because you created a successful business without the things that most people would say you need to start a successful business. And I kind of did the same thing when I started mine. But like, you don't really need a business plan unless you're going to a bank to get financing. Like, you need some kind of clarity around what you'd like to do. But I think people get hung up on, well, I don't have all the things. And I just wanted to stop here for a second to say, like, if you're thinking of starting your own business or doing anything, it doesn't have to be a business.
I completely agree.
Think about, what do I really need?
Exactly. And I
versus what people tell me I need. Yeah.
I taught business to college students, and I know that it wasn't the standard business professor line to say, you know what, some of this stuff you're not going to need, because I do think I've seen this with entrepreneurs, and I've seen this with people starting nonprofits. They get stuck around, we have to have this done, we have to check all these boxes, and they get frozen in this place where they can't move forward because they're trying to check all these boxes. And sometimes you just need to start, and it's a messy start, and that's okay. You just have to start.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And get some forward action, and then you adjust. It was somebody who was explaining it to me about, like, when you're in a car and you put where you want to go in the GPS, until you start moving,
I love that.
It can't adjust. It can't.
Yep.
Yeah. As long as you're sitting in the driveway or in the parking space,
have to move the
nothing
car
can
before
happen.
It actually kicks in, and
and it can't tell you.
So true. I mean, and so many people are just stuck at the steering wheel waiting for it to say something, and it's not going to say something until you get your foot off the gas and take that step. And actually, some of the messiest starts that I've seen with businesses and nonprofits have been the most successful, because they did just dive in, and you can adjust. And once you know what you want to be, then you can slowly start to build in some strategic planning and business planning, and start thinking, about other things. But just start, just get out there, and you have to become comfortable with the discomfort, because there's going to be so much discomfort when you start a business, when you start a nonprofit. And I think people freeze and want to check all these boxes because they somehow think it's going to make it more comfortable, but it's not. Even if you have all those boxes checked, being an entrepreneur is never going to be comfortable.
Right. Right. Yeah. And especially new entrepreneurs don't understand that's what's going, that's how it's going to be. It's not like, that there's a clear path. And if you, like you said, if you have all the boxes checked, then it's going to be smooth sailing. No, it never is. And
no.
When we say that, we're not saying that to discourage anybody, just to prepare you to be like, okay, this is what it is. This is the ride, and it's more fun than you can imagine, and it's crazier than you can imagine.
I only had a company name. I had done a DBA at the local town hall. Didn't really have a logo, just a company name. And I signed my first client, And while I was working with that client, I started to figure out, okay, this is what I know how to do. This is what Bevara can do well. So I took that first client and figured out, okay, these are going to be the services. And then I started marketing based on the success of that first client. And so really I want to encourage folks who are thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, just to step into it. You don't even have to have a business name. Work on a project, volunteer on a project, see if it's a good fit, but just start and get that forward a momentum, and don't think you have to have everything beautifully written in this 20-page business plan. Like you said, that's great for funding and angel investors, but for most entrepreneurs, it's get that first client and evolve from there.
Yes, such good advice. So your business actually exploded.
To be just this little kitchen table venture, and it exploded. And in between 2004 and 2018, it grew substantially, and it grew to have a staff. It grew to have clients in the U.S., Canada, Europe, and China. And I was traveling quite a bit, and I would just take my daughter with me. My husband was also commuting overseas, so I started getting clients where he was going, so that our family could travel together. And it became a business, and becoming a business rather than being an independent contractor. Those were two different things to me. And one day I woke up and, oh my goodness, I was running a staff and managing a business and doing all these things that I never imagined that I would. I thought I would just be literally at the kitchen table working on projects for clients until my daughter maybe graduated high school. That was the initial thought back in 2004, but the universe had other plans.
Yeah, right. And so, well, since the show is called "Fine" is a 4-letter word, you got to a point where everything was not fine.
It's such. I was in 2018, in January of 2018, I hit a brick wall going about 1,000 miles an hour, and had this awakening. And it was actually one of my college students who kind of pushed me into that wall. I was teaching a course, and we were having some conversation, and one of my college students said, "Professor Muscat, what would you do if you didn't own Bevara?" And I had never thought of that. By 2018, I had begrudgingly decided that Bevara would probably be the only job that I have. I had been telling everybody that I feel fine. I was really falling out of love with my business, but I didn't want to admit it, because this is something that I had created. It was like another child, and no parent wants to say that they don't love their child. And it does. There was no
right, and it becomes your identity,
healthy boundary between myself and Bevara. And I didn't realize until I took a sabbatical, and looking back now, how much resentment I had for a Bevara, and I was just on autopilot. I was taking on everybody who wanted to work with us. I said yes to. I was adapting our services so that it was all about the bottom line. How much money can we get? And I wasn't enjoying it anymore. And when the student asked me this, I stopped dead in my tracks, because I had never thought from 2004 to 2018, the thought had never crossed my mind about what would I do if I didn't work at Bevara. And I thought about it, and I said, well, I would probably go back to where it all started, which is sociocultural anthropology, and that's where I began my career, doing work with some Native tribes out in the Southwest. That's what I studied. That's what I had. The work in Bevara that I loved the most is when we worked with various tribes on traditional lifeways. So I said, well, that's what I would do. And then I gave my class an assignment, because I was just completely rattled. I was just totally rattled by that. And I said, yeah, you're like, really? I can.
Yeah, wait. That's an option?
I can walk away.
That I never considered that could even be a possibility.
And that for me just wasn't computing, because I just had felt like I was in this bad marriage with my company, and that I couldn't, slightly emotionally abusive
Mm-hmm.
between the two of us that I couldn't get out of. Um,
It's funny that you say that, because that actually, and some of my listeners might have heard me say this before, but when I had my first business and I was in a similar situation, it wasn't exploding and creating tons of revenue. It was actually a little bit the opposite. I wasn't able to scale it the way I had intended. And a friend said
it
to
is.
me,
It
this is
is.
like
Yeah,
watching you in an abusive
it
relationship.
absolutely is. And other people outside of me tell me outside of the company now say, "Oh, we could all see it." And I look around like somebody could have mentioned this to me back in
Mm.
2018. I would
But
have
you
said, I
probably
am
wouldn't
fine.
have paid attention at the
And
time.
everything
You
is
weren't
fine.
ready.
Bavara's fine. I'm fine. We're all good. We're all
Yeah.
fine. Uh, because fine was my favorite word then. And while the kids were doing an assignment, I opened up my laptop and there was a headhunter who was looking for somebody to create an Indian market as director of advancement at the Abbey Museum, which is dedicated to the Native American communities here in Maine. And I just got all these butterflies. And it was the first time that I had had that kind of professional butterflies before. And I said, well,
Mm.
this looks interesting. I'll, uh, I'll respond. I'll send in my resume. And after that, I started getting a whole bunch of other recruiters asking about other positions and started doing interviews. And I didn't even know what exactly I was doing. I just sort of subconsciously just knew that I needed a change, but consciously wasn't quite admitting it yet. So I was just going through all these motions. I ended up getting a few job offers and took the one in Maine, which is where I am now on Mount Desert Island in Maine, and worked for
Mm-hmm.
a couple of years setting up the Abbey Museum Indian Market, which became an award-winning Indian market for Bar Harbor here in Maine. And it wasn't until I had completed that experience that I realized it was just the sabbatical that I needed. And I know it's an unconventional sabbatical because I went and worked and did something else. Uh, but for me, it was just what I needed
Yeah.
at that time.
It's amazing to me. I mean, really just awe is the best
Mhm.
word I can use here in how the universe works. That question was posed to you. The
Mhm.
opportunity showed up on your computer at the same time.
It did, yeah.
And then how
Because
the
that
event, like
happened in
that started the
January, and
ball
my
rolling.
first day here in Maine was May
It
1st. It was a
just,
very fast uh, process. Yes. Yep.
yeah. But
And there it
even the
was. But
instantaneous of the
yep.
question was asked, you opened your computer and there is an
It
opportunity.
can work.
And
It
that
does.
is how it can work. And it
Hmm.
often does. And it's still awe inspiring to me how those events transpire. And then going to another point you
Hmm.
just mentioned about taking kind of an unconventional sabbatical, in that you were still working, because a lot of the conversations we've been having about sabbaticals,
Hmm.
this segment season, whatever, of the show, is people are like, yeah, but I can't afford to do that. And that's not, you were still working and bringing in income, but
It
it
was a
was kind of a
sabbatical
sabbatical
because
anyway,
I
because why?
took a break from Bevara and I focused on one activity that was something that I was passionate about. I also had a change of scenery, which was for me very important. There were some jobs that were a little closer to where I
Mm.
lived in Massachusetts, and I would have had similar results, but for me, coming up to Maine, moving to the island, having a change of scenery made a big difference. And during my time creating Indian Market, it gave me space because I wasn't 24/7 an entrepreneur. I wasn't living and breathing being an entrepreneur. I had time to go hiking. I had
Right.
time to reconnect to friends. I had time to have lunch with friends. I had time to really invest in lots of thinking, lots of just being and doing, and not having the pressures of being an entrepreneur and having to make salaries for individuals and having to do all these things. And in that space, I started to realize what I was really most passionate about, and really came to a recognition that I had fallen out of love with Bevara. And I was able to say that out loud, that, it just, the last 2 or 3 years, our relationship wasn't working. It just, it just wasn't healthy for either of us. And it got me to a place where I was stronger mentally. I was having panic attacks when I started at the Abbey Museum. Those dissipated. My level of stress came down. I was able, until the pandemic hit, able to do some personal travel, and it just, the whole experience just decompressed me to a point where I could see clearly. And I think that's something very important in a sabbatical, is that you give yourself time and space to take some of the fog out of your eyes, sort of the fog of war when you're in the thick of working, and having that time and space and grace for yourself to recognize where you made mistakes and what you want to do differently. That's an important component of a sabbatical, and I think it can be done working. I see every day opportunities that are very project specific, and I found something that was specific to my background. It was a specific project. I finished that project, and so I was able to just focus on that one thing. And I think others could potentially find projects to do that themselves. If they can't, I certainly couldn't have afforded to take 2 years off. So having that income, even though it was a greatly reduced income from what I had at Bevara, having any income during that time period was very helpful, because we had a daughter going off to college. So it was helpful to have that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You just said that so beautifully about how what a sabbatical really is, and it doesn't necessarily require not working and just sitting. It's that creating that space for yourself, allowing yourself grace, and giving yourself the time and I guess, again, space to recharge. And, by doing those things that bring you joy, hiking and thinking and reading and whatever it is,
I had to do at
that actually recharges your battery.
Was give myself permission to feel this way. And that was the hardest thing to overcome. And it took several months and some great coaches and some good therapy to get to a point where I could give myself permission to really dig into how I was feeling, to share it, that I was worthy enough to be visible in how I was feeling in that moment during the sabbatical. And that was a huge growth opportunity for me, one that I wasn't expecting when I started working at the museum. But it led to comfort and a better understanding of who I am. It also led to better boundaries. Led to this velvet rope policy, where I keep certain things on the other side of that rope now, and just led to a very different person, who then, when I came back to Bevara was a very different company, and very, very different company from when it was in 2018. But lots of that was, I had given myself permission really to have my own back and really focus on me, which was something that took a little bit of time to get comfortable with. And I think a lot of folks would feel that way, that you just feel this discomfort when you start looking inward.
Yes, which is why so many people avoid it, because it's not comfortable. And yet, if you would like to get to the other side, to where things are way better, you have to wade through that yucky stuff in the middle. And I appreciate that you brought up that you worked with other people, that you had coaches, and whether it's a coach or a counselor or a therapist, or all those people actually serve different purposes, but that it's not necessarily something that you could do or would want to do on your own, again, because it's uncomfortable, and those people can hold your hand and kick your ass at the same time. Whereas if you were doing it on your own, you're like, oh, this doesn't feel good, I'm not going to do it. And you just step away and stay stuck in that rut. And the people around you will gladly help you stay in that rut, because then it's that's where they feel comfortable interacting with you. So yeah, the second, the getting help,
finding
for,
some
somebody to give you a hand up,
be in,
basically,
support you and lift you up while you're doing mindset work. And that container can take a variety of shapes. I know for some of my friends, it's yoga and their yoga teacher. For some, it's therapists. For some, it's life coaches. For some, it's human design. There's all sorts of different things out there. But whatever container feels most comfortable to you, that's important. And I think you made a good point that it can't always be your spouse and your friends, because they get used to you in a certain way, and sometimes having difficult conversations, you don't always get necessarily the honest feedback from your spouse, or so and so it's important to,
right. It's not that they don't want to help you, they don't necessarily have the capacity to do it. They're too close. So they don't see your blind spots either, which is the whole reason for having, especially a coach, is that they can see your blind spots. They have what's the word I'm looking for? They don't have a words are evading me. When you see something without,
they're more objective
judgments or
Yep.
That's the word. Thank you very much. Jesus. Yes. They can see it more objectively and therefore be more useful in their recommendations. So, okay. So you went through these years, you had that sabbatical time, you got the chance to recharge, and you went back to Bevara.
That I went back to Bevara. So Bevara has been back now for 18 months. And I came back and I knew it had to be different. I knew that if I was going to do this, it couldn't be the way it was before, because it had to be a healthy partnership. And so I looked at our services, and I cut our services down to 3 core services. I cut out being a college professor. I enjoyed teaching, but it had run its course. I had done it for 13 years, and it was something else that was eating up my time. And it was something else that was, grading papers and everything that I had just grown tired of it. So I gave that up and reconfigured Bevara so that it aligned with my core values. And I knew in particular that that nonprofit planning and management, art, culture, and the creative economy, and executive mentorship were the 3 areas that I was most passionate about, and where, if I looked back, those were the projects where I knew I brought the most value. And it was not only my knowledge that brought value, it was my excitement. And I looked back and looked at other projects. I was like, right. I just went through the motions. These weren't successful projects from my point of view. They were for the client. None of our clients knew I was thinking this pre 2018. They thought it was all good, but I certainly wasn't enjoying myself. So I relaunched Bevara, and I did it as a bit of a test. I was like, well, I'm feeling this need to go back. I started seeing ravens everywhere. I was like, okay, I think I'm in a different headspace now. I'm going to try this, and I'm going to give it a year and see how this works. Can I do this differently? Because I wasn't 100% sure that I could do it differently. I knew I had changed, but I was afraid I'd just slip back into old habits. It is.
Right, which is really easy to do once you get back in that same environment. It's easy to fall back into it.
I brought back Leandra DeFeo, who had worked with me from 2012 to 2018, and she was the only Bevara staffer who I wanted to bring back this go around, because I knew she had the same company values. which is empathy, authenticity, really providing a high level of service. And we actually, now one of the things which our clients talk about the most, which is interesting, is how Bevara creates a container for these nonprofits to undergo transformational change in their organization. And one of my clients said that to me recently, and then I realized that that is actually what I was doing with myself during the sabbatical, and just this whole full circle chill came over me that I was able to use my time away from Bevara to gain some skills that I didn't have previous to that, and learn a lot about organizational change and working with individuals. I have very different conversations now when I do executive mentoring than I would have pre-2018. Much more empathetic, much more in a belief that organizations are made up of human beings, and that nonprofits are living, breathing, or organic things with all these human beings, and all these human beings have different knowledge and different skills and different talents and passions that they're bringing, but it's still a group of human beings. And whenever you get a group of human beings together, it can be sometimes difficult, and navigating that and letting nonprofit organizations navigate that in a way that allows them to grow and take advantage of the positive aspects of that is something that now we're really focused on. And that was something that really I hadn't thought about before my sabbatical.
Yeah. So in a way, not in a way, essential to your current success. That sabbatical was essential to your current success, not just to your mind, getting your mind in the right place and becoming healthier physically, emotionally, mentally, all of those things, but for your business, for your career, for your professional life, that sabbatical was essential, which is interesting because I was talking, the conversation I had with Christina Langdon, which published a few weeks ago, she was talking about the that essential, that asking yourself the question, instead of I can't afford to take a sabbatical, or how can I, like it's not going to be possible, to ask yourself the question more, what if you don't? Yes. What are you sacrificing if you don't? And this is a great example of, maybe at the time you didn't know it. Obviously at the time you didn't know it. But looking back, you would have sacrificed your success today.
Looking back at the 18 months, we had the best 5 fiscal quarters in Bevara's history, which actually
interesting. And yet you have your most relaxed,
and it's showing in the quality of product. It's showing in our bottom line, and it's showing up in our bottom line is what convinced me that this has to be part of my being, part of my fabric. And so I plan to take a week or 2 mini sabbatical every year. And it's just me traveling somewhere by myself. This year I'm going to an archaeology dig out in the Four Corners, which is still a tremendous passion of mine, but I'm going to go dig in the dirt for a week and not take my laptop and not think about work. And I'll have those 10 days to do a mini sabbatical. And now the question for me, like you were saying, is if I don't take this time, I don't want a repeat of what happened before. And so I now know that taking time, even a long weekend, just building breaks into my life and into my schedule, and building in time to really have thoughtful work, really to do thoughtful work, is absolutely critical to Bevara's success. That if I am relaxed and I'm feeling whole and I'm taking care of myself, then Bevara will be healthier, and we have a much healthier partnership now. It's much healthier than it was.
Yeah. When you just said you weren't taking your computer, the thought went through my head. Wait, you're not taking your computer? Are you even an American? Yep. Like, like, what do you mean you're not taking your computer?
I will take an iPad.
No, really,
for
truly.
okay.
the cost,
Yes.
again, examining the cost of
It is.
not doing this.
It is. And I
the
even
cost
work with
is too
nonprofit
great.
executive directors now where they are fighting the urge to use any of their vacation time, and they are burnt out because they burnt the candles at both ends. And I sit down with them and have a bit of a let's walk to Jesus conversation about the return on investment if you burn out versus the return on investment if you take care of yourself and you demonstrate that level of leadership to the rest of the staff. That will improve your organization far, far more than you burning out and you having to leave because you have hit that wall. And so many nonprofit leaders are in that stage where they feel like that they can't take the time off, but what they don't recognize is that if they don't, then it's damaging to them and their staff and their organization. And so a lot of executive mentoring turns into, you know what, let's look at numbers and the return on investment. Literally, let's look at the numbers. And if you were to leave or this staff person left and, you know, this program didn't happen because you were sick, you know, what does this look like? And we come to the conclusion that, you need to take that week off and not think about work for that week.
100%. Great point. We've been talking about, you've mentioned the name Bevara throughout this conversation. So explain briefly what it means and then what your logo is, because I've just found it fascinating when you originally told me the story.
Word that means to protect and to keep. And all of our clients are doing that in some capacity. They are protecting and keeping knowledge. They are protecting and keeping their communities. That's core to nonprofit work. And Ravens are there because one of our early projects was in Iceland. And we learned about the old Norse legend of Odin and his two ravens, Hugin and Munin. And Hugin and Munin represent thought and memory. And they'd fly around the world every day to learn the news of the day and then bring it back to Odin. And so when
kind of like the North.
Yes, exactly. They were the original internet.
Internet.
Yes, exactly. I love that.
The original internet.
And so
the OGs.
We knew that we wanted. I'm a Swedish ancestry. Having a Swedish name is a nod to my beloved Swedish grandmother, and so I knew that I wanted some other Norse items in the logo, and we worked with this brilliant artist who, when I told him the story of Hugin and Munin and showed him, which you can see on our website, one of the ancient manuscripts that's in the library in Reykjavik, he made these two beautiful ravens. And the one on the left is Hugin, the one on the right is Munin. They don't look exactly the same. One's a little bit different than the other, and they both have, in our minds here at Bevara, they have personalities. And what's been interesting is that since I started the company, and even during my sabbatical, there have been times where I see these two ravens and they'll come and land near me, and it's always been at interesting junctions in my life. And so I feel this connection now to these two birds, and I feel very grateful for having taken the sabbatical because it has allowed me to more appreciate our brand, our story, our history, and not resent it, which I was doing in 2018. I mean, I look at those ravens now, and I'm so grateful that I can look at them with pride and not be like, oh God, I have to go to work again.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that can happen with your own company, not just when you're working for someone else.
So
so do you dance with the ravens? What's your hype song?
Is Unstoppable by Sia. And I do dance when that comes on. Usually in the morning, I'll take a shower while I'm getting ready. That song, I can't help but not move. So I'm a big proponent of just getting moving and just feeling it. One. And that song has been my hype song for the last 18 months since I restarted Bevara. That's on a constant rotation.
Love it. Awesome. If someone wants to continue a conversation with you, website, how would they do that?
www.bevaraweb.com, which is BEVARA web.com. or they can email at hello@bevaraweb.com, and they can find us that way.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. I will put a link to that in the show notes, as well as a link, as I always do, to the hype song.
It is a great one. That want to
get up and dance to that, because that is a good one.
By the end of that song, it is a good female power song.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Stefanie Joy Muscat, on Fine is a 4-letter word.